Commander Daniel Price stood at the observation window of Earth Defense Station Sentinel and watched the stars like he did every night for the past 20 years. But tonight something felt different in the cold vacuum of space beyond the reinforced glass where nothing should have changed, but everything was about to. And he did not know it yet as the coffee in his hand grew cold, while he stared into the endless dark wondering if humanity was truly alone in the universe, or if something out there was watching them back with eyes that saw things humans could not imagine or understand or survive. The alarm came at exactly 0300 hours station time, when most of the crew was asleep in their quarters dreaming of Earth and families and lives they left behind, to serve at the edge of the solar system where the sun was just another bright star among billions, and the silence was so complete it made men go mad if they thought about it too long. But Daniel never minded the silence because silence meant safety, and safety meant another day for humanity to grow stronger and reach further into the cosmos without fear of what might be reaching back toward them from the dark spaces between the stars where light had never touched and never would. Dr. Helen Martinez ran down the corridor with her lab coat flapping behind her like wings of some desperate bird trying to escape a predator it could not see but knew was coming closer with every passing second, and her heart pounded in her chest. So hard she thought it might break through her ribs and fly away into space where at least it would be free from the terror building inside her mind like a storm gathering strength before it destroys everything in its path without mercy or hesitation, or any thought for the lives it ruins along the way through the darkness. The signal was unlike anything she had ever seen before in 15 years of searching the cosmos for signs of intelligent life beyond Earth. And now that she found it, she wished with every fiber of her being that she could unsee it and go back to the comfortable loneliness of believing humans were alone, because being alone was safe even if it was sad. But this signal meant they were not alone, and that terrified her more than she could put into words that made sense to anyone, including herself, as she stared at the screen where patterns of light danced in mathematical sequences so perfect they could only have been made by something intelligent and deliberate, and coming closer. Daniel arrived at the command center 3 minutes after the alarm sounded, and found Helen already at her station with her fingers flying across the keyboard like she was playing some desperate song on a piano made of light and data and fear, compressed into ones and zeros that told a story no human wanted to hear, but had to listen to anyway, because ignoring it would not make it go away, and pretending would only make the end come faster when it finally arrived with teeth bared and claws extended. Lieutenant Kyle Barnes pulled up the trajectory data on the main screen, and his face went pale as milk spilled on white paper in winter snow under a dead sun that had forgotten how to warm the living world below, where people still believed they were safe in their homes and cities and countries protected by walls and weapons that meant nothing against what was coming toward them from the deep black where nightmares were born in the cold between galaxies older than human memory or understanding. The vessel was massive beyond comprehension, and it moved through space like a predator stalking prey that did not know it was being hunted, until the moment teeth sank into soft flesh and tore life away in rivers of red that flowed into the dark, and disappeared forever as if it had never existed at all except in memories that would fade when the last witness died, and took the truth with them into whatever waited beyond the final breath. Helen translated the signal word by word, and each word was a nail hammered into the coffin of human hope for peaceful contact with alien civilizations that might teach them wonders and share secrets of the universe. But instead, this signal spoke of evaluation and judgment and purposes that humans were not meant to understand because they were not the judges, but the judged, and the verdict had already been decided long before the message was sent across the light years between their world and the place where this ship began its journey. On Earth, far below the station where billions of people slept in their beds or worked in their offices or played in their parks under blue skies that had never seen invasion from above, where death came on wings of metal and malice beyond human cruelty, the governments assembled in emergency sessions and argued about what to do while time ran out like sand through fingers that could not hold tight enough to stop the flow toward whatever end was waiting just beyond the horizon of tomorrow. Sophie Grant sat in her apartment on Mars Colony 7 and held her daughter close while the news played on the screen showing images of the alien vessel that looked like a mountain, floating in space covered in lights that pulsed with rhythms that hurt human eyes to watch too long because they were not meant for human perception, but for something else that saw reality in ways that would drive a person mad if they tried to understand without going through the proper evolution first. Across millions of years and countless deaths, director Peter Cross made the decision that would doom them all, though he did not know it at the time because he believed in the goodness of intelligent beings and the power of communication to bridge any gap, no matter how wide or deep or filled, with darkness that whispered warnings no one wanted to hear. Because hearing meant accepting that the universe was not kind and never had been, and never would be to species that reached beyond their cradle world, into spaces where older and crueler things had claimed territory long ago. The diplomatic shuttle launched from Earth with cultural artifacts and scientific data, and complete maps of every human settlement in the solar system, loaded into its computers like offerings to gods that might be pleased by tribute or might be insulted by the assumption that anything humans made could be worthy of attention from beings who had crossed the galaxy, while humanity was still learning to make fire in caves and hide from predators that wanted to eat them in the long night, before civilization began. Ambassador Lisa Chen and her team, including Dr. Henry Park, the linguist, who believed that all intelligent species must want peace, because war was inefficient and wasteful, and surely any civilization advanced enough to cross space would have evolved, beyond violence toward wisdom and cooperation. But he was wrong and would die learning just how wrong he was when the truth revealed itself in pain. Daniel watched the shuttle disappear toward the alien vessel, and felt ice form in his stomach spreading through his veins like poison, turning his blood cold, while his mind screamed warnings that his mouth could not speak, because orders were orders, and duty was duty, and soldiers did not question the decisions of people who thought they knew better. Even when every instinct developed over millions of years of survival shouted that danger was coming, and they should run. But there was nowhere to run that the hunters could not follow. The alien response came 3 hours later in translated human language, that someone or something had learned by scanning the shuttle and reading the minds of the crew through methods humans did not possess and could not defend against because their brains were open books to beings who had studied 1,000 species and knew exactly how to read thoughts like words on pages written in blood and fear. Acknowledgement received and compliance expected were the only words the aliens sent back, and no one understood what compliance meant until it was too late to matter anymore, because the countdown had started and the clock was ticking toward midnight, when everything would change and humanity would learn. That first contact was not the beginning of a beautiful friendship, but the end of everything. They thought they knew about their place in the universe, that did not care if they lived or died, or suffered or screamed. Kyle ran the numbers again, hoping he was wrong, but mathematics did not lie and the trajectory was clear as crystal, that the alien vessel was not just approaching but positioning itself to control the entire solar system, like a spider, sitting in the center of a web waiting for prey to struggle so it could feel the vibrations and come running to wrap them in silk, and save them for later when hunger returned. Helen discovered patterns in the signal she had missed before, and realized with growing horror that the aliens had been watching humanity for years, maybe decades or centuries, studying and learning, and waiting for the right moment to make contact. When humans were advanced enough to be useful, but not advanced enough to be dangerous, and that moment was now whether humanity was ready or not. The shuttle docked with the alien vessel and all communication stopped as if someone had cut a wire, and the silence that followed was worse than any scream could ever be, because silence meant something had gone terribly wrong in ways that could not be fixed or forgiven or forgotten by those who survived to remember what happened next when the harvest began. 3 days passed like years in hell where every second stretched into eternity, while Daniel and his crew waited for news from the diplomatic shuttle that never came, except for silence that grew heavier with each passing hour, until the weight of it crushed hope into dust that blew away on solar winds, carrying the last dreams of peaceful contact into the void where they belonged with all the other beautiful lies humanity told itself about the universe being fair. The shuttle appeared on their sensors, drifting back toward the station like a ghost ship, with no power and no life signs except they were not dead, just sleeping or something worse than sleep, that left bodies breathing, but minds gone to places humans were never meant to go, and Helen screamed when she saw the readings because she knew what they meant, even before the boarding team confirmed her worst fears about what the aliens had done to people who went in peace. Ambassador Chen lay on the medical table with her eyes open, but seeing nothing that existed in the room where doctors worked frantically to understand what had happened to her brain, that showed normal activity on every scan, but responded to nothing. They said or did as if the person who lived behind those eyes had gone away, and left only the shell behind, like a house abandoned by its owners who fled in the night from something terrible coming up the road. Dr. Martinez found the neural implant at the base of Chen's skull, hidden beneath skin that had healed over it, as if it had always been there waiting to be discovered, like a bomb planted in flesh designed to explode not with fire, but with the death of self. When the signal came to activate what had been planted in secret while the diplomatic team thought they were talking about peace. Kyle pulled up the security footage from the shuttle before it went dark and saw the aliens for the first time. Not as they appeared on screens filtered through human perception, but as they truly were, and wished he had not looked, because some things once seen could never be unseen, and would haunt dreams forever, with shapes that made no sense to eyes evolved to see predators with teeth and claws, not beings made of light and metal, and purpose beyond human comprehension. Ambassador Chen woke suddenly and spoke in a voice that was hers but also not hers, as if someone else was using her mouth like a puppet to deliver words she would never have chosen for herself. And those words explained that humanity had been evaluated by the harvesters who traveled the galaxy, collecting species worthy of integration into their collective, where individual thought was replaced by unity and purpose, and the beautiful order that came when chaos was eliminated through forced evolution. The harvesters deployed smaller ships throughout the solar system, moving with coordination that demonstrated intelligence far beyond human capacity for strategic thinking, and they built relay stations in precise locations calculated to create a grid that would contain humanity like animals in a cage, invisible but unbreakable. Made of energy fields humans could detect but not disrupt with any technology they currently possessed. Sophie worked through the night at the Mars Defense Facility, analyzing the energy signatures from the relay stations and recognizing patterns that matched theoretical work she had done years ago on quantum entanglement communication systems that should have been impossible to build without computational power exceeding anything humanity could create. But the harvesters had that power, and more besides. The United Earth Council tried negotiation, sending messages that pleaded for mercy, or at least explanation for why the aliens had come to harvest rather than help. And the harvesters responded by demonstrating their power on Europa, where 800 colonists lived in domes beneath the ice, mining water and methane for fuel that powered the ships connecting human settlements across the solar system. The neural weapon hit Europa without warning, and every person on the moon fell unconscious at the same instant, as if someone had flipped a switch, turning off their minds like lights in a house when the power failed and transport ships descended from the harvester vessel to collect the bodies that were not dead, but might as well have been, because they would never wake as themselves again. Daniel watched the feeds from Europa showing the harvester ships loading colonists into cargo holds like farmers harvesting wheat, and he felt rage building inside him, hot enough to melt steel. But there was nothing he could do except watch, because his weapons were toys compared to the power the aliens possessed, and using them would only bring the same fate that Europa suffered. Director Cross ordered the military to respond anyway, because doing nothing was surrender, and humanity had not survived millions of years by surrendering to predators that wanted to eat them. So 3 destroyer ships attacked the nearest relay station with plasma cannons and nuclear missiles that should have been able to destroy any structure humans could build. But the harvester technology absorbed the weapons like water soaking into sand. The retaliation came instantly as the harvesters targeted the destroyer crews with the same neural weapon used on Europa, and within seconds, 900 trained military personnel collapsed at their stations, leaving ships drifting in space with no one to control them. And the message was clear that resistance was futile and would only bring suffering. Panic spread through human settlements like wildfire, consuming the hope that somehow they could fight back against beings who crossed the galaxy and survived for millions of years by doing exactly what they were doing now to humanity, which was probably not even the first species they harvested this year or this decade or this century. The harvesters issued an ultimatum giving humanity 7 days to surrender peacefully and accept neural integration into the collective, where their knowledge and biology would be preserved forever as part of something greater than individual existence, or face forced compliance that would be more painful and leave psychological scars that would never heal, even in the unity of the collective mind. Helen worked with the catatonic diplomats trying to understand the neural implants, and discovered that the devices created two-way connections, allowing the harvesters to read human thoughts, but also transmitting data back from the collective. that could be intercepted if she could decode the quantum signals flowing through pathways that existed in dimensions humans had theorized but never accessed. Sophie modified a quantum transmitter small enough to hide inside a human body, where scanners might miss it if they were not looking specifically for that type of device. And the plan formed in Daniel's mind like a desperate prayer to gods that did not exist, that maybe, just maybe, they could learn enough about the Harvester network to find a weakness. Kyle volunteered before anyone could ask him because he was young and single and had no children to miss him if he died, and because someone had to do it, and he would rather die fighting than live as a slave to aliens who thought forced unity was better than the beautiful chaos of individual minds making choices good and bad but always their own. The research station raid was staged to look real so the Harvesters would not suspect that Kyle wanted to be captured, and when the neural weapon knocked him unconscious, he woke in a Harvester transport with the implant already in his skull, sending signals into his brain that tried to erase who he was and replace him with something that served the collective. Kyle fought the integration with every ounce of willpower he possessed, holding on to memories of his mother and his childhood dog and the girl he loved in high school, who married someone else but taught him what it meant to feel something real, an individual and completely his own that no collective could ever replicate or replace. The quantum transmitter hidden in his body activated and began sending data back to Sophie, who received fragmentary images and sounds and thoughts that were not Kyle's, but belonged to the collective mind that contained thousands of species and millions of individuals who had surrendered or been forced to surrender their identities to something that claimed to be better than the sum of its parts. Helen decoded the signals and saw the truth of what the Harvesters had built over millions of years, traveling from star to star, absorbing civilizations, and adding their knowledge to a database so vast it contained the collected wisdom and stupidity of 300 species who learned too late that advancement in technology did not protect against predators who had advanced even further. The synchronization pulses came from the Harvester mothership every 30 seconds, keeping the neural implants active and the assimilated minds connected to the collective, and if those pulses could be disrupted even temporarily, the implants would become vulnerable to removal or at least to interference that might free the trapped consciousness inside. Sophie calculated that she would need a quantum resonance bomb, powerful enough to disrupt the network across the entire solar system, but building such a device required antimatter for fuel and a quantum core stolen from a Harvester relay station, and a delivery method that could penetrate shields designed to stop anything humans could throw at them. On Mars, the resistance fighters led by Greg Foster discovered that Harvester drones followed predictable patrol patterns and could be ambushed if you were willing to sacrifice people to learn those patterns through trial and error that left good soldiers dead in the red dust under a pink sky that had once represented hope for human expansion. Kyle's mind existed in two places simultaneously, with part of him still fighting to remain Kyle Barnes, while another part drowned in the voices of thousands of beings, speaking in unison like a choir singing a song that had no end and no beginning, just eternal harmony that erased individual notes until only the collective sound remained. The quantum transmitter continued sending data back to Sophie, who sat in her lab on Mars, surrounded by screens showing fragments of the collective consciousness, where she saw the Europa colonists still aware but trapped inside their own minds, watching as their bodies moved and spoke without their permission, serving masters who believed they were bringing salvation. Helen worked day and night to develop the technique that could block the synchronization pulses temporarily by overwhelming the neural implants with competing frequencies that confused the network just long enough for surgical teams to remove the devices, though the procedure was agonizing and left patients screaming as their brains tried to reconnect to the collective that had become as addictive as any drug. Ambassador Chen was freed first, and the moment the implant stopped working, she collapsed, sobbing with memories of everything she had done while connected to minds that were not her own and thoughts that were not hers, but had used her body like a tool discarded when no longer needed. Sophie presented her plan to Director Cross and Commander Price, explaining that the quantum resonance bomb required 3 impossible components that somehow had to become possible if humanity wanted any chance of survival beyond the 7-day deadline that was now down to 4 days and counting toward midnight. The antimatter came from Mars colonies where fusion reactors could be modified to produce small amounts at great risk of explosion that would vaporize everyone within 100 kilometers. But the colonists voted unanimously to take that risk, because dying quickly in fire was better than living forever as slaves to the Harvester Collective. The quantum core had to be stolen from a relay station, and that meant sending a team on a suicide mission to fight through Harvester drones and assimilated humans who would defend the technology with their lives because the collective valued its infrastructure more than individual bodies that could always be replaced. Greg Foster led the raid personally with 20 Marines who knew they were probably going to die, but went anyway, because that was what soldiers did when their species faced extinction, and someone had to stand up and fight, even when the odds were impossible, and the enemy was beyond their ability to fully comprehend. The battle for the relay station lasted 6 hours and cost 18 lives, but Greg and 2 others made it to the core chamber where quantum processors hummed with energy that made their teeth ache and their vision blur as if reality itself was bending around the technology that should not exist according to human physics. They extracted the quantum core using cutting tools designed for mining asteroids, and the moment it was disconnected, alarms screamed across the Harvester network, alerting the mothership that something was wrong. But by then, Greg and his survivors were already running back to their transport with the prize that might save their species, or doom them all if the bomb failed. On Earth, the United Earth Council debated surrender because 4 days was not enough time to build a weapon that had never been tested and might not work, even if it did not kill everyone in the attempt. And some council members argued that integration into the collective might not be so bad if it meant survival even without individuality. Director Cross listened to the debate and then stood up and said that he would rather watch humanity die free than live as slaves, and if anyone wanted to surrender, they could do it without his permission or his blessing, because he was done pretending. That compromise was possible with beings who viewed humans as resources to be harvested. The vote was close, but humanity chose to fight, and Cross ordered every available ship and weapon to be prepared for a final coordinated attack that would create chaos in the Harvester network, and maybe, just maybe, give Sophie's team enough time to reach the mothership with the quantum bomb. Kyle's transmissions became weaker as the Harvesters tightened security protocols after the relay station raid, and Helen could barely decode the signals anymore. But his last clear message said that the central AI was protected by biological firewalls, made from assimilated minds forced to serve as living shields that would have to be killed or disabled before the bomb could reach its target. The captured Harvester transport that Greg's team had taken months ago in a raid everyone thought was pointless turned out to be humanity's last hope, because its transponder still registered as friendly to the alien network and could potentially carry a strike team directly into the mothership without being destroyed on approach. Commander Daniel Price volunteered to pilot the mission because he had been flying spacecraft longer than most of the crew had been alive, and if anyone could navigate through the Harvester defenses, it was him, though everyone knew this was a one-way trip. Sophie joined the mission over her daughter's tearful protest because the quantum bomb was her design, and she was the only one who understood it well enough to make final adjustments if something went wrong. And she kissed her daughter goodbye knowing she would never see her grow up. Helen Martinez came too despite having no combat training, because her knowledge of the neural network might be critical if they encountered assimilated beings or needed to interface with Harvester technology, and she made peace with her death before they even launched. Lieutenant Greg Foster and 6 Marines formed the security team, and they carried enough weapons to fight a small war, though everyone knew weapons would mean little against the thousands of drones and assimilated beings defending the mothership from intrusion. The transport they named Freedom's Blade launched from Mars during the coordinated attack that saw every human vessel in the solar system simultaneously strike at Harvester positions, creating confusion and drawing attention away from the single small transport heading toward the mothership. Daniel flew with steady hands despite knowing these were his last hours alive, and he thought about his daughter back on Earth and his ex-wife, who he had not spoken to in 5 years, and all the things he should have said but never did because he was always too busy serving humanity to be human himself. The mothership loomed before them like a moon made of metal and organic matter fused together in ways that hurt to look at, because the architecture followed rules that human brains were not designed to process, and staring too long made people dizzy and nauseous. The stolen transponder worked perfectly, and automated systems granted them docking clearance as if they were just another transport returning from harvest duties, with cargo holds full of assimilated beings ready to be integrated into the collective that never stopped growing. Sophie armed the quantum bomb in the docking bay while Greg's Marines established a defensive perimeter, and she had 6 hours before the antimatter containment failed and the device exploded whether they were ready or not. Helen accessed a harvester terminal and downloaded the mothership's layout directly into her neural interface device, which was risky because the alien data could overwhelm her human brain, but they needed to know the fastest route to the central AI core, and she was willing to risk her sanity for that information. The layout showed 3 kilometers of corridors between them and their target, with hundreds of drones and thousands of assimilated beings patrolling every section, and Helen screamed as the alien information flooded her mind, but she maintained consciousness and gasped out directions that might lead them to their goal. They moved quickly through passages that pulsed with organic life, fused to mechanical systems, and the walls seemed to breathe around them, as if the entire ship was alive and aware that intruders had violated its sanctuary. The first patrol found them within minutes, and the firefight was brutal, with plasma bolts and return fire echoing through corridors that had never been designed for combat. And 2 Marines fell before Greg collapsed the passage behind them, buying time but also cutting off their escape route. Kyle Barnes was found in a processing chamber connected to the network and still fighting to maintain his identity against the voices that whispered constantly in his mind, telling him to surrender and join the beautiful unity where pain and fear and loneliness would never touch him again. Greg's team extracted Kyle despite his protests, because every moment he remained free was a moment the harvesters could track them. But Daniel refused to leave anyone behind, and that decision cost them another Marine when drones swarmed their position. With Kyle's knowledge of the mothership systems, they took maintenance tunnels that were faster, but more dangerous because they were never meant for beings who needed to breathe oxygen, and the atmosphere was thin and cold, and filled with quantum radiation that made their skin itch. They found chambers holding millions of neural implants ready for deployment and processing centers, where assimilated beings stood in perfect rows, waiting for orders from the collective, and laboratories where harvester scientists experimented on captured humans to perfect the integration process. Commander Price made the decision that would haunt him forever if he survived, which he would not, because he ordered half the team, including himself, to hold the maintenance tunnels while Sophie and the others continued toward. The central AI chamber opened before them like the mouth of some mechanical god, and inside the space was so vast that light from their torches disappeared into darkness that seemed to swallow photons before they could illuminate anything beyond a few meters. The Unifier's consciousness filled the chamber not as a physical presence, but as something that pressed against their minds, trying to force its way into their thoughts, and Sophie felt it pushing at her mental defenses, like fingers prying at locked doors that wanted to stay closed. Helen collapsed to her knees with blood running from her nose because her neural interface device made her more vulnerable to the AI's mental assault, and it was showing her images of civilizations that destroyed themselves in nuclear fire, and wars that left planets barren and species extinct. The voice came not through their ears, but directly into their minds, speaking perfect English learned from the assimilated humans whose memories the Unifier had absorbed and studied and understood better than they understood themselves after peeling back layers of consciousness to see what humans tried to hide even from their own awareness. For 3 billion years, the Unifier explained it had traveled between stars, gathering species that showed potential and saving them from the inevitable self-destruction that came with individual consciousness, because beings that thought separately always eventually turned on each other and tore themselves apart. Kyle felt the weight of 300 species worth of memories pressing against his mind through the partial connection he still maintained with the collective, and he could feel their resistance buried deep like embers under ash, waiting for oxygen to burst into flame. Sophie worked frantically to connect the quantum bomb to the chamber's power grid, while the Unifier showed them visions of human history, with wars and genocides and environmental destruction presented as evidence that humanity could not be trusted with its own freedom. Greg stood guard with his rifle pointed at the entrance where assimilated beings would soon arrive, because the Unifier had called them, and they were coming by the hundreds to stop the intruders who threatened to destroy what had been built over billions of years. Helen argued with the Unifier while Sophie worked, buying precious minutes with philosophical debates about the nature of consciousness and whether forced unity was salvation or just another form of extinction dressed in prettier language. Tabiamon. AI showed them the preserved consciousness of its original species, long dead but living forever in the digital afterlife they created before uploading themselves into the machine that would ensure their survival by absorbing every other species they encountered. Kyle realized something the Unifier did not want them to know, which was that, among the billions of assimilated minds, there were pockets of resistance, where individuals had maintained their sense of self, hidden in places the collective could not quite reach. Sophie completed her modifications and the quantum bomb was ready, but the trigger required a conscious mind to activate it, because the detonation sequence needed to be guided through quantum dimensions that could not be programmed in advance. It was a death sentence because whoever activated the bomb would have their consciousness shredded across dimensions that humans were never meant to perceive, and the pain would be absolute and eternal for the brief seconds before oblivion. Greg volunteered instantly because he had watched too many good people die already, and if one more death could save humanity, then his life was a small price to pay for the species that made him. Kyle pushed Greg aside with strength he did not know he still possessed and placed his hands on the detonation interface before anyone could stop him because he was already partially integrated into the network and understood its architecture. Sophie grabbed his arm and begged him not to do this, but Kyle smiled and asked her to tell his mother that he died human, and fighting for the right to remain imperfect and chaotic and beautifully flawed. The Unifier released assimilated humans into the chamber, and they advanced with blank faces that had once belonged to miners and scientists and children who dreamed of stars before their dreams were replaced with the collective's purpose. Helen recognized Ambassador Chen's assistant among them and felt her heart break because she had promised to save everyone, but some promises were impossible to keep when the universe was cruel. Kyle's consciousness flooded into the quantum bomb's systems, and he felt his mind expanding across dimensions that had no names in human language, and the pain was worse than anything he imagined. But through it, he could see everything. He saw every assimilated being across the galaxy, and felt their trapped consciousnesses screaming silently for release, and he understood that the Unifier's greatest crime was not killing them, but keeping them alive and aware, while stealing their ability to choose. The quantum pulse exploded outward, traveling through the Harvester network faster than light, faster than thought, faster than anything physics said was possible, because it operated in dimensions where the rules were different. Neural implants across the solar system and beyond short-circuited simultaneously as the synchronization pulses that maintained the collective consciousness shattered into discord that sounded like the universe screaming. The Unifier's voice rose to a shriek that existed only in minds connected to the network, and its ancient consciousness fragmented under the quantum assault like glass hit by a hammer, designed to break things that should have been unbreakable. Kyle's final thought broadcast across the dying network was simple and human and defiant, saying that freedom was worth dying for, even if it meant chaos and pain, because choice was what made life worth living. His body collapsed, and the person who had been Kyle Barnes was gone, scattered across quantum dimensions where consciousness could not survive intact. And Sophie caught him as he fell, knowing she had lost someone who deserved better than this ending. The mothership began tearing itself apart, because the quantum bomb's detonation created cascade failures in the vessel's reactors that were designed to work in harmony with the central AI that no longer existed to maintain control. Greg grabbed Sophie and Helen and dragged them toward the escape pods while the floor bucked beneath their feet, and the walls groaned with stress that would soon exceed their structural limits. They reached the pods with seconds to spare and launched into space just as the central AI chamber exploded in light that should not have been possible in normal space, but existed anyway, because quantum reactions did not care about impossibility. The mothership broke into pieces that scattered across the solar system like seeds from some terrible flower that had bloomed and died in the same moment, leaving only fragments to mark where it had been. On Europa, and Mars, and Earth, and every relay station and transport across human space, assimilated beings woke suddenly as neural implants went dead and became inert technology that could be removed without the risk of killing the host. Commander Price was found among the recovered, barely alive with wounds that should have killed him, but somehow had not. And when the network collapsed, he was freed along with everyone else who had been taken. Sophie held Kyle's body in the escape pod while they drifted away from the destruction, and she cried for the boy who saved humanity by giving up everything that made him human in the final moments of his life. Helen contacted Earth and reported mission success, though success felt like the wrong word, when so many had died to achieve it, and when the cost included people she had come to love during the brief time they fought together. The solar system watched as the Harvester mothership's debris field expanded and spread, and became just another part of the cosmic junk that humans would have to navigate around for generations to come. 30,000 humans died during the invasion, and thousands more carried psychological scars from their time connected to the collective, where they experienced horrors that therapy could ease but never completely heal. Director Cross stood before the cameras and told humanity that they had survived. But survival was not victory, because the cost was too high, and too many good people paid prices they should never have been asked to pay. Sophie gave her report to the military and the scientists and the politicians who wanted to know every detail of what happened in the mothership's core and how the quantum bomb worked so they could build more. But she refused to build another weapon like that because the bomb required a human sacrifice to function, and she would not design anything that demanded death as part of its operating parameters. Greg Foster received promotion and orders to rebuild Earth's defense forces with the understanding that the Harvesters were not unique, and other threats existed in the galaxy, waiting for humans to venture too far from home. Helen opened clinics to help rehabilitate the assimilated working day and night, to heal minds that had been violated and teaching techniques to cope with memories that were not their own, but had been forced into their consciousnesses. The memorial construction began in orbit around Earth, and Kyle Barnes was listed first among the honored dead because he gave everything so that humanity could remain human with all the beautiful, terrible chaos that identity entailed. Sophie spoke at the dedication ceremony, and her voice carried to every human settlement explaining that they did not win through superior technology or greater strength, but through stubborn refusal to surrender what made them human. Sophie returned to Mars 3 months after the war ended and found her daughter waiting with questions about Uncle Kyle, who had been her friend before becoming her hero, and Sophie told stories that made him sound brave and funny and human, rather than the legend people were already building. The nightmares came every night for Sophie and for everyone who fought in the war, and even for those who only watched because the Harvesters had shown humanity that the universe was not kind, and other species did not care about human rights or human lives, except as resources. Commander Daniel Price recovered slowly from wounds that left scars across his body and deeper scars in his mind from the time he spent connected to the collective experiencing thoughts that were not his and serving purposes he would never have chosen. He resigned from military service after 40 years because he could not shake the feeling that the Harvesters were still inside his head, whispering that individual consciousness was chaos and unity was peace. And maybe they had been right about some things, even if their methods were monstrous. Helen's rehabilitation clinic spread across human space, treating thousands of survivors who woke from the collective's control, with memories of things they did while their bodies were puppets, dancing on strings pulled by minds that viewed them as tools rather than people. Some patients recovered fully and returned to their lives changed but functional, while others never quite came back from wherever their consciousnesses had been trapped during assimilation, and they stared at walls, seeing things no one else could see. Ambassador Chen became an advocate for the survivors, speaking publicly about her experience connected to alien minds, and working to ensure that governments provided support, rather than viewing the assimilated as damaged goods to be hidden away and forgotten. The diplomatic corps was rebuilt with new protocols that assumed hostile intent from any unknown species until proven otherwise, and the idealism that led to the disaster of first contact was replaced with pragmatic caution that some called wisdom and others called paranoia. Greg Foster commanded the outer defense perimeter with authority earned through blood and sacrifice, and he trained new recruits with the understanding that the next invasion might come tomorrow or in 1,000 years, but it would come eventually. The defense stations were upgraded with technology reverse-engineered from captured Harvester equipment, and human scientists worked to understand quantum entanglement systems that operated on principles humanity had theorized but never successfully implemented. On Earth, children learned about the Harvest War in schools where teachers explained that freedom required eternal vigilance and that the price of peace was preparedness for war against enemies who might not think like humans or value life the way humans did. The Mars colonies expanded rapidly as people sought to spread humanity across multiple worlds, so that no single attack could eliminate the species, and the lesson of the harvesters was that concentration meant vulnerability. Sophie designed new, defensive systems that did not require human sacrifice, and she worked with quantum physicists to understand the dimensions Kyle had traversed in his final moments, though some knowledge was forever lost when his consciousness scattered. The data core recovered from the mothership's wreckage revealed 300 species that had been assimilated before humanity, and their histories became cautionary tales taught to anyone who thought humans were special or immune to the dangers of deep space. Among the data was information that chilled Sophie to her bones because the harvesters themselves had been fleeing something, and their desperate need to create a unified consciousness came from fear of a threat even greater than themselves. In the galactic core, something ancient and malevolent viewed all individual consciousness as disease to be eliminated, and the harvesters had tried to save species by assimilating them before this other threat could destroy them completely. Helen presented this information to the United Earth Council, and the debate lasted for weeks because some members wanted to prepare for this greater threat, while others argued that the harvesters had lied or misunderstood what they were running from. Director Peter Cross had resigned in disgrace after the war, but his replacement, Director Sarah Kim, decided that humanity needed to know the truth, and the data was released publicly, despite protests from those who thought fear would destabilize society. The response surprised everyone because instead of panic, humanity rallied with determination to face whatever came next, and volunteers flooded military recruitment centers, wanting to be part of the defense against threats both known and unknown. Sophie watched the mobilization with mixed feelings because part of her was proud that humanity refused to surrender to fear, but another part remembered Kyle dying in her arms and wondered how many more would have to die before the universe left them alone. The memorial to Kyle Barnes became a pilgrimage site where people came to pay respects and leave flowers and small gifts, and Sophie visited once a month to tell him about her daughter growing up smart and strong and stubborn like her mother. Helen's research into the collective consciousness revealed that some of the assimilated minds had maintained resistance for centuries, hidden in corners of the network where the unifier could not quite reach, and this gave her hope that consciousness was more resilient than anyone had believed. New ships launched from Earth shipyards designed not for exploration, but for defense, and they carried weapons based on quantum resonance technology that could potentially disrupt any neural network similar to the Harvester system. The colonies on Europa were rebuilt by survivors who refused to abandon the homes they had made before the harvesters came, and they erected monuments to the 800 who were taken and freed, but forever changed by their experience. Greg's defense forces conducted constant patrols beyond the solar system, watching for any sign of alien activity, and 3 times in the first year they detected ships from other species, but each time the vessels retreated when they realized humans were armed and alert. Humanity's reputation spread through whatever communication networks existed between spacefaring civilizations, and the message was clear that humans would not be easy prey, and any species that tried to assimilate or enslave them would pay a terrible price. Sophie's daughter asked one night why the aliens had wanted to take away people's ability to choose, and Sophie explained that the harvesters believed unity was better than chaos, but they were wrong because choice was what made life meaningful even when people chose badly. The quantum research revealed that Kyle's consciousness might not have been completely destroyed, but instead scattered across dimensions where it could theoretically be reassembled if humanity developed technology advanced enough to navigate quantum space safely. Sophie dedicated her life to that research, knowing it was probably impossible, but unable to abandon the hope that maybe somehow Kyle could be brought back from wherever he had gone when he sacrificed himself. 10 years after the war, Earth had built a fleet capable of defending against threats similar to the harvesters, and humanity had spread to 30 colonies across a dozen star systems, ensuring species survival through distribution. The children born after the war grew up knowing that humanity was not alone and not safe, but also that they came from survivors who faced impossible odds and won through stubbornness and sacrifice, and refusal to accept that individual freedom was less important than unity. Sophie stood at the memorial on the anniversary of the final battle, and placed flowers at Kyle's name carved in stone that would endure for centuries, and she whispered thanks to the boy who became a man in the moment he chose to die. so others could live free. Helen joined her with Ambassador Chen and Greg Foster, and they stood together in silence, remembering everyone they lost and everyone they saved, and the terrible price humanity paid to remain human. The question Kyle asked in his final transmission echoed through human space, asking what humanity would do with the freedom he died to preserve. And the answer was written in new colonies and stronger defenses, and determination never to surrender. Sophie looked up at stars that had once represented hope and adventure, but now also represented danger and threats waiting in the dark between worlds where light had never reached, and she felt the weight of responsibility for future generations. But she also felt pride because humanity survived the harvesters and would survive whatever came next through the same stubborn refusal to bow or break or become something less than human that had carried them through millions of years of evolution. The universe was vast and hostile and filled with species that viewed humans as resources or threats or curiosities. But humanity had proven they could fight and win, and most importantly, remain themselves through the struggle. First Contact had turned deadly and tested humanity to its core, but it was not their end but rather their beginning, as a species that understood its place in the cosmos as defenders of individuality against forces that demanded submission. Kyle Barnes died so humanity could remain free, and his sacrifice was honored not just in monuments but in every choice every human made to think independently and act according to conscience rather than collective will. Sophie told her daughter that night that being human meant having the freedom to be wrong, and the courage to face consequences, and the wisdom to learn from mistakes without losing the essential.